existing management plan in order to increasingly recognize the estuary-dependent economic activities and the interrelationship between the wetland, forest, wildlife, marine ecosystem, tourism, and livelihoods dependent on fishing and other forms of bioprospecting. This will require further interdisciplinary contributions from varied fields, and it must include consideration of how emerging small and micro enterprises can be supported and developed alongside the environmental reality of the system. It's important at this point, ladies and gentlemen, to pause and to consider the absence of the socio-economic factors in the estuarine management plan in a wider policy context. South Africa, as you know, is a signatory to the Convention on Biodiversity. The post-2020 biodiversity framework, which will be considered in Kunming, China, in September this year, has three interrelated aspects. The first is conservation for present and future generations. The second is sustainable use. And the third is equitable community beneficiation. Now, our Cabinet has endorsed these three principles because they are in line with our own domestic policies and legislation. This means that going forward, it will be necessary to ensure that all three aspects are included in the policy documents that guide the estuarine management plan and the maintenance management plan. As you can see, the panel's report includes both immediate and future work. Accordingly, we have spent the past month since we received this report studying all its implications, and I can confirm to you today that the department, as well as the iSimangaliso Wetland Park Authority, are committed to ensuring that the recommendations by the panel will be implemented. This will be done in collaboration with iSimangaliso, KZN Wildlife, and sister government departments, including the Departments of Agriculture, Land and Rural Development, Water and Sanitation, as well as the district and local municipalities. To make sure that this happens, I have also requested that some members of the panel will remain on for a period of 6 months to monitor and advise on implementation processes. In conclusion, let me say once more that the department and I are committed to offering solutions that will safeguard the heritage in iSimangaliso, while also supporting the livelihoods of communities in and around the park. This report has to be the beginning of a new chapter of collaboration and working together in the sustainable management of the St Lucia Estuary. I thank you.
Thanks, Minister. Members of the media, as we said at the very beginning, will now take a presentation which is a review of the scientific basis for the breaching of the mouth. And Madam Maureen Nobo, as a panel member, will take us through the scientific report.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Let me greet the Minister, the Honorable Minister, Ma'am Creecy, the CEO and the board of iSimangaliso Wetland Park, and the department DFFE personnel, the members of the panel who are in today. It's myself, Mosindo, and Dr. Ndabeni. And also greet everyone who is in this meeting and are observing all protocol. First, let me just indicate who the members of the panel of us, Dr. Nazrin Pierre, who was the chairperson, and this lady is an ecologist, Mr. Bonani Madibizela. He is not in, I think he's online. And he is the wetlands management specialist. Dr. Linda Veni, who is a social economic specialist. Myself, Sibusisiwe Maureen Ngobo. I'm a social scientist, and Professor Derek Stretch, who's a hydrologist. Now, we came to iSimangaliso 6 months ago, and let me say this, iSimangaliso got the name because indeed it is a wonder. We did the length and breadth of iSimangaliso. We could have gotten very excited, but fortunately the minister had given us the roadmap. She had given us the GPS. No matter how excited we could have been, the GPS told us where to off-ramp, it told us where to reroute, and she has alluded to that, which are the 4 terms of reference that she spoke to. When you look at the 4 of them, the 3 of them are about a request that you please advise me. And the 4th one is the development of the guidelines for the immediate and ongoing management of the system. Now, I am not going to get into the information that she has given to the media, but I will just touch on some of the things that are sitting in this report. It's a very long report, but the presentation that I'm doing is just 15 minutes, and it has got 15 slides, so you can imagine 1 minute per slide. We did look at the significance in terms of the management plan and whether the breaching was in line with the management plans, and does it appear to have been approved by the relevant authorities. And there, we saw that the EMP states that management should continue to limit artificial breaching, and then only for ecological reasons. I will talk to this when I go down. The breach directly contravened the GF recommendations, as alluded in the minister's opening remarks. Because the recommendations by the Global Environmental Fund said facilitate a joint mouth, no artificial breaching. Instead, other alterations could be performed. For example, the deepening and clearing of the channels, removal of alien vegetation, reduced water obstruction, partial floodplain restoration, and extensive monitoring. And this report was not considered in the latest management plans because they then fall outside of the time we were here, which was a 6 months period. When we came to the definition of exceptional circumstances, which the GEF speaks about, we did see that there's a need, the minister has alluded to that, that the exceptional circumstances must be defined very well and clearly in the management plan. Now, we looked at the ecological circumstances, the build-up, the sedimentation accumulation, the prolonged freshwater state, the alien invasive species, encroaching vegetation in the Narrows and in the Umfolozi, Usunduzi rivers, the low biodiversity and a decrease in the necessary function of the estuary. Again, when you look at the terms of reference number 2, I'm proceeding with those. The social and economic circumstances, indeed, it is quite visible that there's quite a bit of bad flooding and a damage to the infrastructure, and the decline in tourism and recreational angling, and the reduction in fishing success and increase in community conservation conflict. The minister has alluded to all these things. When I go to the terms of reference number 3, We looked at the bridge impact on hydrology and ecology, and we looked at the different levels of the breaching and assessed what effects would take place if breaching occurs at different heights, and we considered the two breach levels, 1.25 and 2.5. We looked at the breach in terms of what impact it had on the social situation, the lack of benefits to farmers, apparent benefit to ratepayers, tour operators, and recreational fishers, and the lack of communication and understanding regarding the technicality of the science, language, and other important events, which then meant communities are not able to fully partake in these very important discussions, and the superficial inclusion of communities and lack of equitable gains, and the non-recognition of community concerns and the lack of independent liaison. We proceeded to look at the breach on economics. COVID-19 dealt a blow in the entire country, as it is well known, and the farmer losses were estimated to remain the same and possibly projected into 2022 because of the 21-22 flooding. And we then did the key recommendations around maintenance. Number one, we did the key recommendations around monitoring, maintenance. We said, in accordance with the MMP, maintenance bridging could continue. And clearing the St Lucia and bridge channel of vegetation and sediments and maintaining the dune. And in terms of TOR4, again, the recommendations around monitoring your biophysical and your socio-economic. And it was quite eminent, the fact that science has to match, all the sciences have to match with the social sciences as they inform policy formulation and decision making. And then we did key recommendations around communication, your independent liaison, and the authority being responsible for communicating the development and use of monitoring tools. And it also became quite clear that the language that is being used is that is science, and at times when you engage with the communities, because we did a lot of engagement of all the stakeholders, as the minister has alluded to, and an opportunity was open for people who are even outside of the country to put in as stakeholders and as interested individuals to put in their view. And we did get, this they did electronically, and we did get the contributions. And the future work, we indicated the future work in terms of management and hydrology of the catchment, in terms of the investigation of water use and water licenses, land use and ownership, clear guidelines and definitions for artificial breaching, and the inclusion of local knowledge, indigenous knowledge and perspectives, and a full assessment of artificial levels and canals. And then we have also said in the future, it would be of great importance for the iSimangaliso to have a dedicated interdisciplinary study and an SMME master plan to explore alternative livelihoods. And then we did submit our concluding remarks to the minister, and we said indeed the breach was in line with the management plans. But the suggestion was that these plans account for the EWE advisory reports, such as the GEF report, and the social needs of the society. And it can't be managed as an isolated system anymore. for it to be integrated, as much integrated as possible. And indeed, it is dynamic and can function in a wide range of ecological states. Structured and transparent communication is key for the management of this system in the future. I have just captured those important things to affirm what the minister has alluded to, that indeed the 5 of us gave this information to the minister after doing the length and the breadth of the wonder, iSimangaliso, Wetland Park. And now, let me humbly take the opportunity to present the report to the minister and also indicate the excitement that we really had as a panel when we involved in doing this work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Program Director. Greetings to the Honorable Minister who is with us here today. The Chairperson of the Board, Professor Nzama, the Deputy Chairperson of the Board, Nkosi Tembe, the board members present here with us, Honorable Minister, the CEO of Isabella KZN Wildlife is on his way, so he will be joining us. But I see colleagues from Isabella KZN Wildlife are with us here. Colleagues from the department and colleagues from iSimangaliso and the media. A very good morning to all of you. It is exciting today that we are meeting here, obviously being coordinated by the Honorable Minister to deal with this very important issue of the St Lucia Estuary. We will all appreciate the keen interest that has been demonstrated by a number of stakeholders in this system. It does definitely demonstrate that St Lucia Estuary, or the Lake St Lucia Estuary, is our estuary. It's not an estuary for iSimangaliso alone, because we all have an interest and we all have a say into what happens in that estuary. But in the main, the entity itself is iSimangaliso, because it is indeed a public entity. As the Honorable Minister has alluded, it is of no use to have a plan, to have a report, which is actually an outcome of the process of the investigation into the issues that she spoke to, and only to find out that we do not have a plan to operationalize the recommendations coming out of that report. So I must say that indeed, as iSimangaliso, we have already started working on the implementation plan so that we can begin to operationalize what is recommended by the panel. So we have accordingly drafted or developed a draft implementation plan, And I must say it is a time-bound action plan because it also has specifics in terms of what is going to be implemented at what time. But of course, you will appreciate that coming into where we are, we have been working with a number of stakeholders. We've worked with the Sokolo small-scale farmers. We've worked with Mfolozi Co-op, or what is known as UCOSP, the commercial farmers. We've worked with the fishing cooperatives from Nimela, Undosi, Dugudugu. And we've worked with small-scale farmers from Dugudugu as well. We've worked with the St Lucia Ratepayers Association, Masfundis Duba Tourism Association, as well as ETIA. So it is befitting that we call this a draft implementation plan because we are still going to engage with those partners because we've been working with them until today. But we could not come here and not present a plan, especially after we have gone through the recommendations. What also becomes imperative is to acknowledge the fact that the system is an old system. But what is key in that acknowledgement is to note that the system has been grossly interfered with for a very long time, and this has significantly compromised its ability to breach normally, or rather naturally, as it is the case with other estuaries. I'm using the word normally and naturally because for the Lake St Lucia, given the interference that has occurred, you need heavy rains. But if you go to your Kosi Bay estuary, you don't need that. It is able to operate normally. So the interference has grossly affected the natural functionality of the system. Because of that, as the report has indicated, we've seen issues or challenges of your bank flooding, the sedimentation, the salinity, the inability of the estuary to function as a necessary for the fish species in particular to allow fish to go and spawn. Those are the issues that it has come up with. Because of the complexity of the issues and the challenges that has brought us to where we are, it is clear that this challenge that we have, the bank flooding and all these other issues that we're talking about, cannot be attributed to iSimangaliso or be apportioned to iSimangaliso alone. It would need a multi-stakeholder, it would need an intergovernmental approach. And if we had the minister talking, and you will see when I also present or talk to the issue of the implementation plan that we would need other government departments, like the Department of Water and Sanitation and many other departments. So it is quite a complex system that we're dealing with and requires multi-stakeholder and as well as intergovernmental approach to deal with it. As I present, I'm not going to go back into what Mrs. Zobo has presented, but I will just indicate that in October 2020 we had a multi-stakeholder symposium, as I indicated, which was held to determine how best we can deal with the challenge that we had, which was posed by the interference with the system that I have talked about. Now, in line with that, as I indicated, we've worked with different stakeholders to make sure that everyone is afforded an opportunity to comment, make an input into what we're dealing with. As I said earlier on, this is not a problem for iSimangaliso or a challenge for iSimangaliso. It is something that needs to be dealt with a number of stakeholders. Let me first say, on behalf of the entity, that we appreciate the work that has been done, firstly by the minister when there was a concern, that she did not say, no, my entity has done it in accordance with the management plan and therefore you must not comment. She allowed that democratic process to say, I hear you and I hear your concerns. I will therefore appoint an independent panel, not iSimangaliso, so that they will then investigate whether iSimangaliso has done what it did in accordance with what it was supposed to, in this case being the management plan or the estuary maintenance and management plan. We also welcome the report and we note the recommendations, and as I indicated, we have subsequently to demonstrate our commitment and acknowledgement of the recommendations on the development of the implementation plan. The issue of the monitoring has been spoken to and it's quite key. And it's an issue that we are going to deal with quite a lot. The presenter, when she was talking about the issue of the monitoring, she's talked about a number of issues. And one of the issues that we want to talk about over and above that is the issue of the water quality, the water volume, the issue of the sediment dynamics, as well as the hydrology of the entire system, because those are key in the monitoring. So the first point, if you look at our implementation, is the issue of the monitoring plan, to develop that monitoring plan so that we can monitor how the system is operating. Because clearly, as you have heard from the presenter presenting the recommendations of the panel, what seems to be clear is an adaptive management system that needs to be implemented. Which basically means that in order for us to implement or execute that adaptive management, we will have to be informed by scientific data, and obviously that will come from the monitoring process, which will then tell us what to do, when and how. One of the key issues that is also coming out quite strongly in terms of the implementation plan is the issue of the dune maintenance. Some of you may have seen the system, the dunes, and some of you may have seen or noticed that the dunes are quite infested with vegetation and some with casserine, alien invasives in the main. And what those invasives do, they stabilize the dune. So if you've got a higher dune, it then makes it very difficult for the rivers like Mfolozi and St Lucia to bridge naturally. And I think the chairperson or the presenter of the panel did indicate that in terms of the sizes. So the dune maintenance becomes one of the issues that we want to look into. And in terms of the timeline, that is going to be done in April. The communication is an issue that also needs to be looked into, because if we don't communicate, trust me, other people do communicate, but you wonder what they are communicating. So we want to make sure that there is proper communication of the scientific data. We want to make sure that there is proper communication of this plan in particular. There is proper communication of the management interventions or actions. All the issues that people may raise, we will have to make sure that there is proper communication. But to make sure that this is done in a manner that is not subjective, it is as objective as possible, we would have to establish an independent liaison. And this is what we are going to do with the partnership that we've already created with universities, NGOs, etc. So those are the things that we are going to look into in terms of the communication. The use of indigenous knowledge when communicating is an issue that we will also look into. We are not going to disregard indigenous knowledge in as much as we'll rely on the scientific data and information, but we are going to look into that. We are going to convert, as the presenter was indicating, the technical document for indigenous population consumption so that people can relate to what we are saying. And then we will develop that intensive communication plan. And those, again, are going to be dealt with in April 2022. And the intensive communication plan is going to be dealt with again in April 2023. Maintenance of the Mvolozi and Msundozi rivers is a recommendation that was put forward by the panel, and will coordinate stakeholder engagement platform to make sure that we deal with that. And there is a time frame that is associated with that. Clearance of Msundozi and Mvolozi river and beach channel, the vegetation as I talked to, the issue of the sediment as well. So what we're going to do there is part of our implementation plan to respond to